My dad went to Europe with his girlfriend for a month and left me alone at home with just $20. I was 13. My dad had full custody of me, and that fact mattered more than anyone realized back then. My mom had already remarried and started a new life, so my world was my dad, our house, and whatever rules he decided were law. I was 13 and still believed that parents, no matter how strict or distant, didn't cross certain lines. That belief stayed with me right up until the morning he started packing his suitcase, clothes on the bed, passport on the dresser, a quiet kind of excitement in his voice I hadn't heard before. He told me he was going to Europe with his girlfriend, and my first thought was simple and innocent. I thought I was going with him. I stood there waiting for him to say when we'd leave, what I should pack, or at least who was going to stay with me if I wasn't invited. None of that came. Instead, he reached into his wallet, pulled out a $20 bill, and placed it in my hand like it was enough to solve everything. He looked at me and said, "You'll be fine," the same way someone says it when they're already halfway out the door. No food plan, no numbers to call, no neighbor to check in, just that one sentence and a piece of paper that felt way too small for a whole month of life. I remember standing there holding that money, trying to understand how a single bill was supposed to cover food, lights, water, and fear. I didn't ask questions, I didn't argue. I had learned early that pushing back only made things worse. When the door closed behind him, the house felt different. Too quiet, too big. I told myself it was only for a month. I told myself I was mature for my age. I told myself other kids had it worse. That's what you do when you're 13 and trying to survive something you don't yet have words for. But nights stretched longer than days, and every sound made me jump. I learned how loud silence could be when no adult is coming home. By the time that month ended and my dad finally walked back through the door, I wasn't the same kid he'd left behind. I didn't look at him the same way. I didn't feel small in the same way either. Hunger, fear, and being alone had changed something in me that couldn't be undone. He smiled like everything was normal, like time had paused while he was gone. But when he looked at me, really looked at me, there was confusion in his eyes. The kid waiting for him wasn't the one he remembered. And whether he knew it yet or not, the damage had already been done. I grew up in a quiet Delaware neighborhood that sat somewhere between suburban and rural, the kind of place where streets were calm and neighbors recognized each other's cars. Lawns were always trimmed, flags hung on porches, and most families owned the homes they lived in. It was the kind of area people pointed to and said, "That's a good place to raise a kid." My dad owned our house too, a solid place with nothing visibly wrong from the outside. If you drove past it, you'd never guess there was a problem inside. That was the thing about our life. It looked stable if you didn't stay long enough to listen. Inside those walls, it was just me and my dad. No warmth, no long talks. No sense that mistakes were allowed. He believed fear kept kids in line. He believed trust made you weak. Rules weren't explained, they were enforced. Questions weren't answered, they were shut down. I learned to move quietly through the house, to read his moods, to stay out of the way. Love, if it was there, felt conditional. You earned peace by not causing problems. After my mom remarried, things felt even more final. There was no shared custody schedule or back and forth between houses. My dad was it. That made his words heavier and his choices absolute. When he said something, there was no second opinion to soften it. No one to step in and say, "That's not okay." I learned early that adults weren't automatically safe just because they were adults, and that lesson stayed with me longer than it should have. The neighborhood itself felt calm, almost too calm, like it was frozen in time. Kids played outside, parents waved from driveways, but I watched everything from a distance. We didn't have people over. We didn't ask for help. My dad made that clear. He told me not to trust anyone and never let anyone into the house. He said people were looking for ways to take what was ours or interfere where they didn't belong. So I kept my head down and followed the rules, even when they didn't make sense. From the outside, our life looked steady and normal. Inside, it felt like walking on glass every day, careful not to make noise, careful not to need too much. By the time my dad decided to leave me alone for a month, that mindset was already built into me. I didn't see it as a choice he was making. I saw it as something I had to survive, quietly, the way I'd survived everything else. The $20 didn't last the way I pretended it would. At first, I tried to be smart about it. I bought cheap snacks, things that felt like they could stretch if I ate a little less each day. Ramen cups, bread, a couple cans of soup. I told myself this was temporary, that if I paced it right, I'd make it work. but food disappears faster when you're growing and scared, and every time I opened my wallet, it felt lighter than it should have. Within a few days, I was already counting coins, already doing math no 13-year-old should have to do just to eat. When the money was gone, it was just gone. No warning, no backup. I opened the fridge one morning and stood there longer than I wanted to admit, staring at shelves that suddenly looked bigger and emptier than before. The hum of the refrigerator felt loud, almost mocking, like it was reminding me it still worked even if I didn't. I closed the door and told myself I wasn't that hungry. I said it out loud, like saying it would make it true. I'd been taught not to complain, not to need too much, so I treated hunger like another rule I had to follow. Skipping one meal didn't feel like a big deal at first. Breakfast was easy to ignore. I'd just wait until later. Then lunch started disappearing too. I filled my time with anything that distracted me from the ache in my stomach. TV reruns, video games with the sound low, homework I didn't care about. By the time dinner came around, I told myself I'd already gone this long, so what was a little more? Days blurred together, measured not by time but by how weak I felt when I stood up. Hunger changes the way you think. I got slower, quieter. I slept more, not because I was tired, but because sleeping meant I didn't have to feel it for a while. I learned how to drink water just to fill the space where food should have been. I learned how to lie to myself and say this was normal, that I was handling it, that my dad was right and I'd be fine. But every night, when the house went silent, the truth crept in. I wasn't fine. I was a kid alone in a house with no food, counting the days on a calendar and hoping nothing went wrong before he came back. I didn't notice the neighbors at first, but they noticed me. In a place that quiet, patterns stand out. Lights on late at night, no adult coming or going. The same small figure moving between rooms day after day. I thought I was invisible, but I wasn't. People started slowing their cars when they passed the house. Someone waved a little too long. Another neighbor asked, casually, how my dad was doing. Each time it happened, my chest tightened. I answered quickly and kept my distance, the way I'd been taught. They tried to talk to me more after that. A woman from down the street asked if everything was okay. A man I barely knew offered help carrying something I wasn't even carrying. Their voices were gentle, but all I could hear was my dad's. Don't trust anyone. Don't open the door. Don't let anyone in. Those rules lived in my head like alarms, going off the second anyone showed concern. I nodded, smiled, and retreated back into the house every time. Fear felt safer than breaking the rules. At night, I watched through the window as neighbors walked their dogs or took out their trash. I wondered what they saw when they looked at my house. Did they know I was alone? Did they know I hadn't eaten? Part of me hoped they didn't notice at all. Another part of me hoped someone would step in anyway, even if it scared me. That confusion sat heavy in my chest. Wanting help but being afraid of it at the same time is a lonely place to be. I stopped answering questions altogether. If someone knocked, I stayed silent. If someone waved, I looked away. I told myself this was what loyalty looked like, protecting my dad's rules even when they hurt me. But the tension kept building. I could feel it in the air, like the neighborhood itself knew something was wrong. Every time a car slowed near the house, my heart raced. I didn't know what would happen if someone crossed that line and pushed harder, and that scared me more than being hungry. What I didn't realize then was that this was the moment everything started to change. The attention I was so afraid of wasn't danger. It was the first crack in the silence I'd been living in. I just wasn't ready to see it that way yet. That's when the food started showing up. I didn't hear a knock the first time. I just opened the front door and saw a small bag sitting on the porch like it had always been there. Inside were simple things. A sandwich, fruit, something warm wrapped in foil. No note, no explanation. I stood there frozen, my heart pounding like I'd been caught doing something wrong. I looked up and down the street, but no one was there. I brought the bag inside and ate slowly at first, like I had to convince myself it was real. Then I ate faster than I meant to, the kind of fast that comes from not knowing when you'll get food again. After that, it kept happening. Morning, afternoon, evening, 3 times a day, always quiet, always placed gently on the porch. Sometimes it was a container, sometimes a grocery bag, never a knock, never pressure. Whoever was doing it knew exactly how scared I was. They didn't force themselves into my life. They just made sure I could eat. I told myself it would stop any day, so I shouldn't get used to it. But my body didn't care about my rules. I ate like someone who had been empty for too long. I ate like someone trying to catch up. With every meal came a knot in my stomach that had nothing to do with hunger. I felt ashamed. I felt weak. I felt like I was breaking my dad's rules just by touching that food. Needing help felt like failing some test I didn't remember signing up for. I cleaned the containers carefully and hid them in the trash so no one would see. I kept the blinds closed. I tried to erase every sign that someone else was keeping me alive. But the truth was, I depended on it. I waited for those bags more than I waited for my dad to come home. My days started to revolve around listening for footsteps outside, around checking the porch like it was the only safe place left. That scared me. Depending on someone you don't know feels dangerous when you've been taught the world isn't safe. Still, I ate, I survived. And every bite came with a quiet mix of relief and guilt that sat heavy in my chest. I hated myself for needing it, but I hated the hunger more. I hated how close I'd come to disappearing without anyone noticing. Those meals didn't just fill my stomach. They reminded me that someone saw me, even if I didn't know who they were yet. One afternoon, I opened the door while she was still there. It wasn't planned. I just moved too fast. She stood up straight when she saw me, like she didn't want to scare me. She was the woman from down the street, the one who always waved. For a second, neither of us spoke. My heart was racing, and my hands were shaking so badly I had to hold them together. I finally said thank you, and my voice cracked in a way I didn't recognize. It sounded smaller than I felt inside. She smiled, but there was worry behind it. Not the fake kind, the real kind that doesn't try to hide. She asked how I was doing, then paused, like she didn't want to push. Then she asked where my dad was. The question landed harder than I expected. I tried to give a short answer, tried to make it sound normal. But the words came out wrong. I told her he was in Europe. I told her he'd be gone for a month. I told her I was fine, even as my body said otherwise. Her face changed, not angry at first, shocked. Then angry in a quiet, controlled way that scared me more than yelling would have. She asked how long I'd been alone. I told her. She asked if anyone was checking on me. I didn't answer. I didn't have to, she already knew. She looked at the house, then back at me, and I saw something shift in her eyes. Like a decision had been made. She didn't scold me. She didn't tell me I'd done anything wrong. She just said this wasn't okay. Hearing that out loud felt strange. Like someone had finally said the thing I wasn't allowed to think. For the first time, I understood that what I was living through wasn't normal or something I just had to endure. It was wrong. And someone else saw it too. She told me she was going to make some calls. My stomach dropped. Fear rushed back in. I thought I was in trouble. I thought I'd broken the rules beyond repair. But underneath that fear was something else. Relief. Small, quiet relief that maybe I didn't have to handle this alone anymore. My mom got the call before my dad ever stepped foot back in the country. I didn't know that at first. All I knew was that a few days later, 2 people from child services knocked on the door. I almost didn't answer. Old habits die hard, but something told me this was already out of my hands. They spoke calmly. They asked to come in. They didn't rush me. They didn't raise their voices. That alone made the situation feel serious in a way I couldn't ignore. They looked at everything. The fridge with its borrowed food. The calendar on the wall, marked with the days my dad had been gone. They asked how often I ate before the food started showing up. They noticed how loose my clothes were. They weighed me. They wrote things down quietly, like this wasn't shocking to them, but it mattered. No one accused me of lying. No one told me to toughen up. They listened. I kept waiting for someone to yell, for blame to land on me somehow. It never did. One of them sat down across from me and explained what would happen next. They said I'd stay with my mom until my dad came back. Just for now. They said it carefully, like they wanted me to understand that I wasn't being punished. They also said they'd be following up, watching, making sure this didn't happen again. When I packed a small bag to leave, my hands were shaking. I felt like I was stepping into something unknown, even though it was my own mother's house. As I walked out, I looked back at the place I'd been alone for weeks. It looked the same as it always had. Quiet, normal, empty, but I wasn't the same anymore. The silence he left behind had finally been broken. And it wasn't going to close back up just because he walked through the door. When my dad finally came back, it didn't feel like a reunion. There were no hugs, no relief, no sense that something had been repaired just because he was home again. I didn't scream at him. I didn't cry. I didn't even ask how his trip was. I had already done all my crying while he was gone. By the time he walked through the door, something in me had gone quiet. I stood there, calm in a way that surprised even me. I handed him a notebook. He looked confused, like he thought it was homework or some random thing I'd been holding onto. He flipped it open, and the color slowly drained from his face. Inside were pages filled with dates and numbers. Every dollar I spent. Every day the money ran out. Notes about meals I skipped because there was nothing left. Short sentences written late at night when I couldn't sleep. Nights when I cried alone in that house, scared and hungry, counting how many days were left until he came back. I didn't raise my voice when I explained it. I didn't need to. The notebook said everything I couldn't. I told him I'd already been staying with my mom. I told him child services had come. I told him they knew exactly how long he'd been gone and what he'd left me with. That was the moment his confidence cracked. The man who always believed he was in control suddenly wasn't. He tried to explain, tried to justify it, said he thought I could handle it, said he didn't think it was that bad. Those words hurt more than if he'd said nothing at all. Because what he was really saying was that my fear, my hunger, and my loneliness hadn't mattered enough to think about. He saw a problem where he'd meant well. I saw a choice he'd made without me in mind. Europe gave him memories, photos, stories, but it cost him something he could never get back. It cost him my trust. Once that breaks, it doesn't snap back into place. I didn't see him as someone who would protect me anymore. I saw him as someone I survived. The lesson wasn't about money or travel or even bad decisions. It was about responsibility. About how being a parent doesn't stop just because it's inconvenient. Kids don't need perfect parents, but they need present ones. And sometimes the damage isn't loud or dramatic. Sometimes it's quiet, written in notebooks, carried silently by a child who learned too early how to be alone. If this story hits close to home, you're not alone. There are a lot of people who grew up faster than they should have because no one showed up when it mattered. If you've ever had to be an adult too early, or if you're raising a child now and want to do better, these stories are for you. Kids deserve safety. They deserve food. They deserve someone who doesn't leave and calls it a lesson. If you believe that too, stay here. Listen, share this story and subscribe to the channel.